It's been an extremely distressing day for Muslims, Arabs, Palestinians, people who are deeply affected by what is happening to Palestinians in Gaza. And to make things worse, here locally in our communities, we're seeing a spike in hate incidences. And I have to differentiate here between Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hate and anti-Muslim violence. So Islamophobia is what we saw in media and political rhetoric that was perpetuating these stereotypes and tropes about Muslims being violent and barbaric and terrorists and they're not humans and all of that, right? So these are Islamophobic comments, statements. Anti-Muslim hatred can be seen in the way people have been behaving. So at rallies, people getting assaulted, people being called names. So there's been a lot of anti-Muslim hatred going around in terms of incidences. And in Chicago, a 6-year-old boy getting stabbed 26 times to death, being told that Muslims must die. That is an example of anti-Muslim violence. And we've seen that here in our country 2 years ago, where anti-Muslim violence took place in London, Ontario, when an entire family was run over by a white supremacist and self-proclaimed terrorist. I think that what was most upsetting about this, Markham Public Library situation is that this is a public library. This is where children come, families come. It's a community space. And for an email to be leaked, where it is very clear that one segment of the community is being made invisible during Islamic Heritage Month, a time, that has been put aside for the celebration of Muslim identity and history in this country, for that to be removed from the library, and to see these emails go back and forth, it was upsetting to say the least. But, to be made invisible at a time where it's particularly important to be seen, it is stoking fear, it's stoking hatred, it's making families and children and parents feel very targeted. It has come to my attention that, people have been circulating a flyer asking parents to keep their children home. I believe this has come from the community. This is a grassroots concern, mobilization, where parents, not all Muslim parents, but some parents, and let's not forget, Muslims are very diverse. They come from very different socioeconomic classes. We have new immigrants. We have people who've been here for 2-3 generations. We have refugees who are Muslims. We have Muslims who make a lot of money, Muslims who don't make a lot of money. So there are a very diverse range of parents here who are being affected by this hateful rhetoric, this Islamophobic rhetoric going around. So some parents felt that it was unsafe for them to send their children out in the world. Of course, a lot of children walk to school. They take buses to school. Inside schools, I'm hearing stories that teachers have been making comments that are vilifying of Muslims, that exacerbate those tropes of Muslims being terrorists, by having conversations that include Israelis but exclude Palestinians. I think something that's very important for us to touch on here, when our prime minister, when our leaders, when they talk about problems happening in other parts of the world where they exclude and dehumanize Muslims and Palestinians, and they exclude their names from comments of sympathy and care, when they dehumanize them, Muslims get dehumanized in this country as well. Also, when our leaders give immunity to leaders in Israel who are committing war crimes there, they are telling people here that they also will have immunity for crimes. This is the thinking that, and I say this as a criminologist, words matter, narratives matter. And this is why we see incidences of hate and criminal behavior, hate-related, spike up. Whenever there is a political situation that happens, whenever certain communities are seen a lot more on the news, you see it locally. You see it translate locally in one-on-one interactions. I have seen today multiple stories. In Edmonton, a man was attacked and said Muslims are animals. There are women with hijab who are being followed, intimidated. In Chicago, in Detroit, a man today was charged with terrorism because he went on Facebook and he rallied people to come to kill all Palestinians in Dearborn, to round them up and kill them. So when all of this is being shared on social media, and these are very real stories, when these are being shared on social media, how do we think children feel? Young people who are glued to their phones, watching this crisis unfold. And I think it's really important for me to also make a comment about the language around humanitarian crisis. Today, the Prime Minister in the House of Commons finally said that the situation is dire and called for there to be a humanitarian corridor opened up for humanitarian aid to be sent to Gaza because the situation is dire. He did not name Palestinians. So it's really important for us to understand that when you name the people, the victims of one community, but you don't name the victims of another community, you're taking away the fact that they are victims, especially after you just vilified them. A humanitarian crisis usually refers to something that is out of our control. Usually it's, a epidemic, it's an earthquake. A humanitarian crisis was the earthquake in Turkey. That was a humanitarian crisis. And I do understand conflict zones are considered humanitarian crises. But by not naming the people who are committing the violence that has caused the humanitarian crisis, you again are taking away, you're obfuscating the facts. You're causing people to think that certain communities are not aggressors and other communities are aggressors. At this moment, as we are seeing things unfold, when the numbers are above 2,000 people, above 50, today we heard there were 1,500 children killed, bombed in Gaza, in the world's biggest open-air prison, a camp where they've been put in and now are getting bombed. I think it's very, very important right now for us to not expect people from the Muslim community to be tiptoeing around what is happening. We are seeing a genocide unfold. This is not the time to expect the Muslim community to condemn terrorism, to condemn Hamas. This is the time for us to bring the plight of Palestinian people to the forefront. This is the time for us to call out ethnic cleansing, apartheid, 75 years of occupation. This is the time to do that. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to come on camera, and I'm not going to say that, we have to temper ourselves or mince our words, especially when across the border, a 6-year-old boy was stabbed 26 times to death. There is a crisis unfolding in this country, and it's only been 2 years since a man ran over a Muslim family. We are still, as a community, reeling from that violence. And for us to now be expected to condemn terrorism and to, be polite, we are not accepting thoughts and prayers anymore. We want accountability. There needs to be accountability from leadership. We expect them to take a strong stance, because what's happening there is impacting us here as well. What happened with the Markham Public Library incident is a perfect example of, Muslim families needing a place to come and feel seen and safe and visible, and that being taken away from them. I also heard today in a Peel Public School, during Islamic Heritage Month, the Islamic Heritage Month Assembly was cancelled. Again, making Muslim children feel invisible at a time where we need to vocalize these institutions, these corporations, these organizations need to vocalize their support for their Muslim people in their workforce, for their community members. Schools are community spaces. Libraries are community spaces. These spaces cannot be biased in their messaging. We've had messaging come out from a week ago that was very biased, and those messages immediately made Muslims feel unseen, unheard, dehumanized, othered. Right now, the right way to go about this would be for all of these organizations, every single institution that made a statement, to acknowledge the suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza, the violence that's happening against them, and the very real fear in Muslim, Palestinian, Arab communities here. And that fear is not unfounded fear. This fear is based on real incidences that are taking place, crimes taking place, assaults taking place. And this is only going to get worse. So unless leadership takes some accountability and starts to use the right words to be truly inclusive in their care, in their thoughts, in their prayers, we don't need these prayers. We don't need these thoughts. I can tell you that my family is very concerned about my safety. I have spoken a lot in the media, and there's a very real fear that I will be targeted, especially since I have been targeted with hate in the past. Every time I've spoken about Islamophobia, I've had rape threats, I've had death threats sent to me. So there's a very real fear. And I'm not going to diminish. I'm not going to gaslight people into thinking that their fear is unfounded. At the same time, I'm going to ask people to be very careful in what they consume online, because there is propaganda that is being spread on both sides, and people are being misled. There is misinformation, there is disinformation that's going around. So I would ask people, all Canadians, to be very careful in what they're consuming online and what they're sharing online, because some of the fear could be quelled by not going into those spaces and watching things and sharing things that are untrue. I'm not sure if you know, but this is not just about families, but this is about people who are consuming or on social media and social media spaces everywhere. Something that was just sent to me today was the Facebook profile of a Remax realtor who has been sharing hate speech on his page. And this is a professional. We have people in professional positions who feel, for some reason, complete immunity. And this is where I'm asking our leadership, why is it that those who have hate in their hearts and are very bold in vocalizing it, what is making them feel so bold? Why do they feel that there are not going to be any repercussions? Because we are seeing LinkedIn, Facebook, social media, we're seeing people with their identities, with their real identities, sharing hateful messages. So this is a problem that is not just with schools and children, although they are the vulnerable parts of our community, but this is a problem that I'm seeing spread all over.